Here's an experiment for you. Take passionate experts in human resource technology. Invite cross-industry experts from inside and outside HR. Mix in what's happening in people analytics today. Give them the technology to connect. Hit record. Pour their discussions into a beaker. Mix thoroughly. And voila, you get the HR Data Labs podcast, where we explore the impact of data and analytics to your business. We may get passionate and even irreverent, but count on each episode challenging and enhancing your understanding of the way people data can be used to solve real-world problems. Now, here's your host, David Turetsky.
Hello and welcome to the HR Data Labs podcast. I'm your host, David Turetsky. Like always, we try and find very fun, interesting, exciting people to talk to inside and outside the world of HR about what's happening in the world of HR today. Today, we have with us a fascinating guest who's going to give us some really intriguing insights. Ann Fulton, who is the CEO and founder of Fuel 50. Hello, Ann. How are you?
Oh, hi, David. Great to be on the call today.
Ann, why don't you give us a little bit more about your background?
Yes, so not only CEO and founder of Fuel 50, but I think really my story is I have a lifelong commitment to trying to predict careers for people around the world. It's been my lifelong passion since the age of 14. And that led me to become an organizational psychologist, builder of psychometric tests, author of 2 books, with the second one out, The Talent Revolution, from Forbes on August the 8th. So yeah, predicting careers is my game.
We'll put links to those books in the show notes so people could reference them to get access to them, okay?
Super.
So, Ann, we're going to go into your topic in a minute, but before we do, what's one fun thing that no one knows about Ann Fulton?
On the note of career predictions, my first career prediction was that I was suggested that I could become a funeral director at age 14. So I was given 2 career choices, funeral director or vocational guidance counselor. And
wow.
But that sparked my lifelong interest in where on earth did that science come from that would suggest I could be an undertaker or a funeral director.
Wow.
What's the science behind it? And could I possibly do better at career predicting than that pencil and paper test?
No, you weren't wearing goth clothing. You weren't like dressing up Halloween all parts of the year. They didn't have that, right? They weren't bringing that data into the equation.
No, it was a very antiquated little pencil and paper test that you self-scored, but presumably there was some science behind the relationship between careers guidance counselling and funeral directors. So yeah, started this lifelong fascination of how could I possibly do a better job of career prediction for people around the world.
That is a fascinating story, and one which I think people are now thinking, because I'm doing the same thing, what did my guidance counselor say I should be when I was a little kid? And for the life of me, I can't remember, but I'll get back to you on that, Ann. I'll tell everybody at some point.
I've heard some great stories. One I remember was a couple of twins, young men, age 15. One was predicted, according to the science we were using at the time, as a bricklayer, and his brother was predicted to be a TV producer. And I was thinking, how am I going to explain these results to his parents? Both ended up in these careers. One's a tradie, and then the other one is currently producing a TV show that is absolutely memorable and was exceeding my expectations in terms of that career prediction.
Wow, that's amazing. So, Ann, our topic for today is thrive or survive, organizational resilience, how to go from surviving to thriving. So, Ann, our first question is, what's the journey from survive to thrive in this economic era?
Hey, everybody. I'm Lori Rudiman. What are you doing? Working? Nah, you're listening to a podcast about work, and that barely counts. So while you're at it, check out my show, Punk Rock HR, now on the Work Defined Network. We chat with smart people about work, power, politics, and money. Are we succeeding? Are we fixing work? Probably not. Work still sucks, but tune in for some fun, a little nonsense, and a fresh take on how to fix work once and for all.
Yeah, great question. And I think that we all know that there are challenges at the moment economically as, do we have recession globally? Do we have recession in the USA? If so, what's it going to look like, and how quickly are organizations going to recover from this recessionary era? So it's something that many organizations are facing. And I think the way that we're thinking about it is around focusing on organizational fitness. So, what does a fit organization need to look like, through this era of optimization? So I'd like to start with a question for you, David, reverse psychology here. And, I'd love to understand, what does fit mean to you personally? How do you feel when you're fit and on your game? What's that mean to you?
Well, so I think it's a holistic fitness. I think there's a mental fitness, there's a physical fitness, and there's actually even an economic fitness. And that whole being, and maybe you can even throw in there social fitness as well. But there's that whole being or whole purpose that everything is working in concert, that there are balanced levels, there are balances in, the different pieces of your life so that you feel like a whole person, that you feel your relationships, you feel your interpersonal relations, you feel you feel strength, you feel happy. There's a balance to things. So if I can borrow from Star Wars, there's a balance in the Force that, drives you. And so to me, when you ask, are you fit or how do you feel about fitness? I feel like fitness is something that it can't be judged in isolation of physical versus mental versus other pieces. It has to be judged as a holistic thing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I love that definition. And it's exactly how we need to start thinking about fitness for organizations. But, I guess for me personally, like you, holistic, it's really important that you have this sense of being on your game, you're feeling well, you're ready for what challenges are ahead, you're prepared, you are planned, you've done your best, to be prepared for whatever is ahead of you. There's an element of caretaking your nutrition, whatever your goal might be, your overall wellness, your rest, your sleeping, and, how are you tackling whatever goal it might be in terms of your own personal fitness. So, I love your Star Wars analogy in terms of, the feeling the Force. So we think about fitness in terms of our own organization. So fit is one of our values, right? So we have a few values for our organization of Fuel 50 around the letter F. So fast, fun, fantastic, and fuely, are four of our values. But the fifth value is fit. And what we talk about for our organization in terms of being fit, it's actually, rather than necessarily being fast, it's being fit for purpose. So sometimes we need to move fast, sometimes we need to move slow and carefully, but we also caretake across the entire organization, everyone's wellness, their own personal resilience, having a balance. So we have what we call refuel days, for everyone once a quarter. And it's really around caretaking individuals to allow each and every person in our organization to be at their best. So if we were to then apply, that kind of thinking around fitness, whether it's a J&J or a United Nations or a Meta, those organizations, what does fit mean to them in terms of their own organizational resilience and wellness, and allowing each and every person to be at their best? So bringing in a marketplace mentality allows every individual across that organization to be ready for a future, and it may be an unknown future, but to be reskilling, to be investing in their learning, to be on their game, to have goal alignment with the organization, so you can see what the organization's big picture goals are and what am I doing to contribute towards that goal, so that each and every individual is in effect optimized to be at their best. And if we can do that one person at a time, we're able to scale that into an organization. And then what we can see from those organizations is when we scale one person at a time, we can have everyone on a learning journey towards a career path and identifying the skill gaps on that journey. There's multiple ways that you might be able to tackle a career goal, but for each step along the journey, you've got your defined learning needs, reskilling gaps that will be personalized to you. But for every single learning need or skill development requirement, you are connected to a mentor, you're connected to a coach, you're connected to learning assets, online learning, you're connected to stretch assignments and gigs and projects that are going to allow you to develop that skill for the future of both yourself and that organization. So true organizational alignment, doing it one person at a time. And I think just on that point, the last thing that I would say around that is one of my favorite sayings is snowflakes can turn into avalanches. And what we mean by that is snowflake, if you think of every individual creates a snowball. If we get a whole team aligned, values aligned, and thinking about their mission and working towards that mission and goal, and next thing you know, you've got multiple snowballs across an organization. And, then we're able to create that impact where one of our customers, first in the world to develop a COVID-19 test, not only were they redeploying people fast for a world crisis of trying to solve this global problem, so that redeploying people using, a fuel gigs marketplace, but also in the 6 months prior to that moment in time, we had 375,000 reskilling actions taken by employees across that organization. So this is truly a fit organization that was resilient, agile, and able to respond to a global crisis in a way that was absolutely meaningful. One person at a time, but collectively, agile, fast, quick to solve the organization's mission at that moment in time.
One of the things that strikes me, though, Anne, is that agility has with it a tax. And what I mean by that is there's a ton of transitions that get made. There's a ton of actions that happen. Even the mentoring takes a tremendous amount of work to ensure there's alignment and to ensure that there's data that tracks all of those things. Because one of the things that's great about Agile is that it enables an organization to react to the market. But one of the other problems about Agile is that so often artifacts that had happened during agility tend to get lost because Agile kind of assumes, or Agile excuses, I think is a better word, the lack of transparency in that. So I guess the question I have for you is that does the agility lead to much more data and then a maintenance and that kind of being a tax on the agility?
Absolutely amazing question, and do agree that we need to talk about that. And I love the use case of mentoring. For me as an individual, who might have the right skills and experience that's going to help me with a particular skill gap. So, who might I best work with? And possibly a mentoring transaction might be for a particular skill for a, defined period of time, 3 months. Mentor matching is supported by AI as you're matched with a mentor, checking their availability, able to then track, most importantly, their outcomes. So the example I often use is Excel, right? I love Excel. I could spend days, fiddling around with spreadsheets. It's not necessarily my top talent, but if I have an engagement with a mentoring engagement with my CFO, who's an absolute whiz, I've got 3 questions or 3 skill development areas within Excel. I can have a before and after. Here's my skill level before. I can ask my manager. I can ask my mentor for, what's my progress against, particular skills that I'm developing. And we get that through 360 feedback so that you can see, what gains are there at an individual level, but also at aggregate across an organization as we invest in those learning moments, whether it's mentoring or coaching or stretch assignments. What's the skill state before and what's the skill state after? So an organization can start to get a lens across the entire employee population of what skills are developing, what skills are emerging, what skills gaps do we have, and how are our people at aggregate, learning and growing that skill set that we need as an organization for the future.
Like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss a show by clicking subscribe. This podcast is made possible by Salary.com. Now, back to the show.
So if there are 3 things HR practitioners should be investing in today, what do you think they would be?
Obviously, from our, that we think about it from an employee empowerment level. We've seen quite a shift to democratic principles now as a result of, Me Too movement and Black Lives Matter. So the employee voice is really important, and empowering your employees to be at their best would be number one. I think number two is thinking about bringing leaders on that journey. So, supporting your leaders to be able to have great coaching conversations, to be able to ensure that you've got goal and values alignment across the organization, but also that you've got a really robust skills architecture across the organization so that you're able to do this at the macroeconomic level. So 3 things we think about, focusing on the employee, supporting the leaders to do a great job of people enablement on their team, and then, thinking about things at the aggregate level from the organization skills intelligence point of view.
Those are 3 very important things, but those are 3 very difficult things, especially to do together, because the more empowerment you do at the employee level, the more you need to grow the skills of your leaders to be able to listen better, to act on those issues that they find or that they're listening for. And then you mentioned about the career framework and being able to build on organizational skills. That's tough, especially in large organizations, to build those taxonomies appropriately and keep them up to speed, especially in agile workforce, in an agile environment. So how does a HR practitioner actually enable their organization? What practical steps can they do today? Because those are 3 fascinating, wonderful things, but gosh, there's a lot of work each one of those things requires.
Yes, there's no question. And I think that if we're thinking about, career frameworks and what's needed to build that, we're on the cusp of absolute breakthroughs, with generative AI and large learning, machine models, and, Chat GPT is transforming everything that we're doing. So wonderful opportunities to build out agile architectures that, will no longer need the kind of updating that, we had to do manually, taking 5 years to build out a skills architecture, can now be done, really quickly and powerfully, leveraging some of those AI technologies.
So let me kind of pull back to the employee empowerment piece, because
yes,
it's really critical in this environment to be able to listen to people and to hear their issues and to be able to utilize the beauty of the differences that people have. Listening to them is a critical skill. And the reason why I'm bringing this back up again is because I often find that one of those, and maybe I'm guilty of this as well, probably more so than anybody else, listening skills are not key to everybody, but leaders especially. So let me pull on that thread a little bit more. How do you develop leaders, especially leaders who are great in most every other way, to be able to listen to the world of the employee empowerment today and be able to deal with issues that they've never really had to deal with before?
Absolutely. As the world changes and evolves and we survive challenge after challenge, whether it's a pandemic, that we've all experienced in recent times, return to work, hybrid work, methodologies, and, now economic challenges requiring, optimization of an organization. So how do you support people through those challenges? And I think, we have an opportunity as leaders, to ask powerful questions that allow people to coach themselves almost to answers and bring that kind of solution focus. So, I'm sure most of us are, playing with AI today, but, as you're heading into a coaching conversation, it's very easy to go and visit Chat GPT and say, what are 3 great questions that I could be asking, to support my employee on X, Y, Z. So, we can leverage some of these technologies. And I think that I'm not suggesting for a minute that AI is going to replace us as humans. I think, any time that we're, contacting an organization for some help and support, don't we love that moment when we get through to a human, as opposed to, going through multiple threads of press 1 for this and 3 for that. And, by the time you've got through the list, you've forgotten what the order was. I know we all have that moment of joy when we actually connect with our employees. So, going into any employee conversation, taking in, 3 questions that are going to help this employee, move forward in their thinking about whether it's a tactical problem or, whether it's a more important question, a personal challenge that they're facing between, work-life balance. So I think, going in prepared with 3 great open questions into every conversation that's going to help progress that employee's thinking and empowerment, is a really powerful, simple way of building empowerment, one person at a time across your team, but, exponentially as we've got people all thinking about their own solutions and with the support of their leaders can be a really powerful move forward towards empowerment.
Hey, are you listening to this and thinking to yourself, man, I wish I could talk to David about this? Well, you're in luck. We have a special offer for listeners of the HR Data Labs podcast, a free half-hour call with me about any of the topics we cover on the podcast or whatever is on your mind. Go to salary.com/HRDL consulting to schedule your free 30-minute call today. We've been talking about AI. Let's dive into the third question, which is, how should HR be thinking about AI today? And you brought up a couple of really great examples. And one of the things I find fascinating about things like ChatGPT is that, and whether it's Siri or whether it's Alexa, we struggle today, right now, we struggle as users of those technologies with the interface between us and them. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it's a brilliant interface, and we'll get there. But one of the things I've seen, and I'm going to turn it over to you to try and find the answer here, is why are people being so strange about it? Because they're afraid of the AI when they don't know how to use it yet. They haven't been trained on how to get the most out of it. Like even Siri, no one knows how to really use Siri or Alexa. And they're mostly afraid of it because they're on conversations where they bring up a word that kind of sounds like that and she pipes up. So when are we going to get to that goal of being able to be more of a better, more informed consumer of AI?
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, we're on the cusp, of an incredible revolution in technologies. This is going to be as disruptive as that moment in time when we experienced the internet emerging, and we had the green screen and incredible technology that was at our fingertips, but everyone was a bit confused on how to use it. And I think we're at that moment in time that we're all learning. But I also watch my 3-year-old grandson use Alexa and go, Alexa, play the Wiggles, or play me Sesame Street, or, whatever he wants to listen to, Lyle the crocodile. But it's amazing to see the command that a 3-year-old can have of that technology while we're all sitting there thinking, oh, how else can I be using this technology myself?
But that's the brilliant example of that, though, Anne, which is that we use it very transactionally, which is yes. I'll ask it to do something, and it does it. But it doesn't go beyond that one statement or that one question. And usually we get very frustrated when it doesn't understand us. Like you say, Alexa, play ELO's Mr. Blue Sky, and it'll go, okay, we're playing selections from Mr. Blue Sky. And no, I didn't want selections by it. So we don't know necessarily the phraseology yet, or we're not keen to the ways in which the AI wants to get instructions, wants to be fed instructions. And therefore the 3-year-old and we are basically learning as we go along. And probably the 3-year-old is going to grow up in a world where it understands how to get more out of the AI than we do, because they're growing up in that world.
And a 3-year-old brings, a playfulness and a curiosity. And, I'm going to ask this to do anything, right? Because, I've seen what it's going to come back with. But I think it's the art of really good questions and good commands is where we're at today with some of these technologies. And not for a minute am I suggesting that somebody has a coaching conversation using GPT, because I think going in prepared with your 3 questions, can be useful, and some tips on how to progress, a solutions focus into a coaching conversation. However, you would not be wanting to wait for GPT to come up with the answers around what you should ask next. So right. I think, as you say, it is the art, of masterful questions that is going to be the clue for how we unlock, some of the power of these technologies that are emerging.
And as HR, I think as a practice, we don't know everything. HR doesn't know everything. And using ChatGPT as a methodology of research, it's like we used to use encyclopedias or dictionaries. I don't see any difference. It's a tool for us to leverage, or a call center, or an expert or a consultant. Well, no, they're not going to replace consultants ever. But, there is a reason that it could be so fascinating for HR. The fear, to me, seems a little unfounded at the moment. But, I mean, so many companies and even the governments are starting to say, we should put restrictions on it. Really? Why? Why wouldn't we let the market figure it out?
Yes, and I think we're at this wonderful inflection point where we're not 100% sure around how these technologies are going to emerge and how they're going to, augment, the kind of human intelligence that we have today and the way that we work. And so what I'm seeing is that HR are being incredibly thoughtful and embracing of some of this technology. But I think the thoughtfulness with which we use it is going to be super important. So, we were at the Josh Bersin Irresistible Conference a couple of weeks ago. And one of the things that, struck me and some of my colleagues was how open HR are to embracing some of this AI technology, but the real importance of how we're going to apply it and where we're going to apply some of this capability within our organizations so that we are advancing and augmenting our capabilities, but we're not creating risk. So one of the things I've observed is that, that we've got to have some emerging controls on how technologies are utilised, where and when, and being incredibly thoughtful to make sure that we're not creating unnecessary risk for an organisation, that you're unnecessarily perhaps sharing some data with, a wider audience. And have heard a story of, an employee going on and saying, can you help, GPT, can you please help me summarize this data? But risks created while GPT starts to summarize this data, but then goes to another tab within that same spreadsheet and accidentally getting access to some, really important data that wasn't part of the original sharing. So, how are we creating controls and protocols to make sure that we're not creating risk for our organizations?
And to that end, I think that's just like every new technology that we offer, whether it's the internet, whether it's voice response systems or whatever, you gotta be able to put, and it's not even just appropriate controls, just put in intelligence into what is it we're exposing to this stuff and how are we utilizing it and what kind of, to that point, what risk are we putting out there? Because, we all put our information wildly on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, whatever the, technology du jour is. And that's being used, whether we like it or not, by Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, to then sell our data to other companies so that they can sell stuff to us. And so ChatGPT and all these other technologies, there's no difference because we kind of don't know what the back end looks like. Maybe it's because it's too confusing for a lot of us to understand. But I mean, to me, that's guidelines. It's rules. It's not laws.
Yeah, I agree with you. It doesn't need to be at the, state level or,
Right.
federal level in terms of laws of governance, but every organization needs to think around, what's its protocols that's going to create safety for the organization and safety for the individuals. So, I think there's a risk if we're even talking about open source AI, the very fact of that terminology, open source, means that, you are sharing and having a really good understanding of what you're signing up to. And, as you're sharing data and making sure that people understand what and how they might be able to use some of these technologies. Personally, I'm a great fan of augmented intelligence. So if you're thinking about shades of AI, right, we can go to completely, autonomous AI, controlling, but I'm a big fan of, going down the route towards augmented, where we still have, people at the forefront, the human face of our interactions. But, I love the thought of my lawyer or my doctor having all of this information fast and available to them, but I still want to talk, one-to-one with that expert so that they're controlling what information gets shared.
And let me take that example back to what you were bringing up in questions 1 and question 2, which is, engaged leaders in a fit organization, understanding their employees and understanding the engagement of their employees. Wouldn't it be really cool that the AI would enable the conversations, not just being, hey, what should I go in asking this employee, but knowing what's going on with the employee, knowing where they are in their performance evaluation, knowing where they are in their engagement scores. What are things that I could bring up, or what are questions I might be able to best ask them in order to be able to make them feel more a part of our organization and that we're actually paying attention and care about them, and give the manager the tools to not only answer the question, but also understand what the answers might be and what the alternative scenarios could be.
Absolutely. And that's the opportunity that, we do see, which is particularly around employee engagement and satisfaction and motivation. So, imagine a world, and we think this is, possible today, where a leader has, here's the top 3 motivators for this particular employee. This person on my team might be a retention risk for these reasons. And being told, here's 3 questions that you might want to ask this person, to allow them to become, more satisfied, more engaged. If you knew that one of the people on your team was looking for more challenge, or somebody else wanted a little bit more appreciation, being able to, have that augmented intelligence, but you as the manager, want to be able to ask these questions in an informed way. And where there's transparency around what data is shared so that the employee feels comfortable, that their data is being used appropriately within that organization and that's not being intrusive. So, again, some controls around what is used and how it's used has to be carefully thought of. But yeah, absolute empowerment so that we as leaders are asking the right questions and supporting our people.
Well, that's a fascinating example because that there are certain organizations, certain governmental organizations, especially in the EU, that have made certain data, very sensitive data, unavailable, or that the employees got the right to privacy, the right to forget, other things. So the emerging technologies are going to have to skate with, not around, or flow with, not around the restrictions on data, especially personal data, that managers can't have access to, not just shouldn't, but can't have access to, given that the regulations that exist in those locations don't allow them to have those conversations.
Yes, and I commend those organisations and love what we're seeing with the New York AI audit, as being probably the forerunner of something that we're going to see across every state and around the world, as setting some standards that we need to adhere to in terms of, what and how we're applying and where might there be some bias created in the AI. So this comes back to, the earlier point is that HR needs to be thinking really carefully and intelligently around the application, making sure that AI is being used for good, not harm. And I think that that's the underpinning principle that we want to, to continue to adhere to. So where's the benefits? Where's the care that we need to take to make sure that there's no harm done?
And the robots are not taking over. And that this is not a Terminator situation where we have to worry about Arnold Schwarzenegger, coming out of the past or the future to take things away. So we're not going to go there yet because we don't believe that that's where AI is taking yet. So hopefully it doesn't get there. And we could talk about this stuff for another couple hours, but I know that we can't do that. So I wanted to thank you so much for coming on and spending time with us. It was a very, very interesting and intriguing conversation. And we might actually ask you back to keep going on it because there's so much to talk about there.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure. And as you say, predicting the future is one of my favorite topics, and how are we leveraging some of this technologies that are available to us today into the future, is something that I could talk about forever. So you really appreciate the opportunity, David, being on the call and joining you today.
Thank you again. And thank you for listening. Take care and stay safe.
That was the HR Data Labs podcast. If you liked the episode, please subscribe. And if you know anyone that might like to hear it, please send it their way. Thank you for joining us this week, and stay tuned for our next episode. Stay safe.